Some people choose to be heroes, some people are forced into it. Billy Butcher was neither. He was a man born into violence, raised in violence, and who eventually learned to turn that violence into a weapon. Growing up in the poor back streets of London, the shadow of a father who was a completely different man behind closed doors, there were only two people on earth who could keep the rage inside him in check. His brother Lenny, and the woman he'd meet years later, Becky. But here's the most painful truth of this whole story. When fate took both of those people from him, one by one, Butcher didn't turn into a bad man. He turned into something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose. And let me tell you, because this is the part that really gets you. Billy Butcher spent his entire life chasing one single name. He burned everything for that name, turned the whole world against himself, built a team, hunted for years without sleep. He believed that name belonged to the monster who took everything he loved. But the truth that comes out at the very end of the comic is this. The name Butcher hated, the name he torched his whole life over, wasn't even the real culprit. And by the time he found that out, it was already far, far too late. Tonight, we're going to talk through how an ordinary English kid became the most dangerous and most ruthless hunter in the world, page by page, from the first panel of Garth Ennis's comic all the way to Butcher's last breath. Get comfortable, put your phone aside, because this isn't a hero's story. This is the story of how a man falls apart. And honestly, out of all the characters I've covered, very few have disturbed me as much as Butcher, and yet pulled me in just as hard. Before we start, I'm going to ask you one small thing. If you enjoy these long comic-based character deep dives, please subscribe and hit that like button. Because these stories genuinely take forever to put together. I check every single scene one by one, and the only reason I can keep doing this is you. Drop a comment too, tell me which character you want to see next. Anyway, let's get back to it. It all started in London's East End. Billy Butcher's full name is William Butcher. He was born in a working-class neighborhood of London, the older of two boys. His father, Sam, was the local baker. In fact, he was known as the most respected, most powerful man on the street. People greeted him, people trusted him. But every night when that front door closed, Sam became a completely different person. And I want to stop here for a second. Because most people remember Butcher as just that hard, sarcastic, fearless guy. But you can't understand how he got that way without knowing where he came from. Behind closed doors, Sam Butcher was a cruel man who treated his wife terribly. His mother, Carol, endured this for years, so much so that at one point, a blow she took cost her the sight in one of her eyes for good. Little Billy and his brother Lenny spent their whole childhood growing up with those sounds, with that fear. Picture it for a second. A father everyone outside loves and trusts, but inside that house at night, a totally different man. What happens to a kid who grows up watching those two faces? Well, that's exactly what happened to Billy Butcher. And here's the cruelest part. Billy grew up becoming the very person he hated most in the world, his own father. The rage inside him wasn't something he chose. It was handed down to him. Billy was a troublemaker at school. He fought, he mouthed off to teachers, he was always causing problems. On one hand, he was trying to escape his father, and on the other, he was slowly turning into him. That contradiction was eating away at him from the inside. And this is where that horrible difference between how his mother and his father handled him comes in. One time, Billy hit a PE teacher. When his father heard about it, in a strange way, what he said wasn't entirely wrong. You let people know you won't be pushed around, he said. Because to Sam Butcher, the world was a cruel place, and the only way to survive in it was to be hard. His mother was the opposite. She wouldn't punish him. She'd wrap her arms around him. There are other ways to deal with things, she'd say. Two separate worlds, two separate ways of being a person. And little Billy, caught somewhere between those two extremes, tried to figure out who he was. The problem is, if a kid doesn't find a healthy way to express his anger, anger takes on other shapes. With Billy, it showed up as a constant hunger for a fight. It was like he was looking for a valve to release the pressure inside him, and when he couldn't find one, he lashed out at everything. Honestly, something you see in a lot of kids raised in abusive homes. And Billy's tragedy was that he could never fully calm that anger. He could only suppress it for a while, and that was thanks to Lenny and Becky. Then came that one night. One night, after one of his father's outbursts, Billy couldn't take it anymore. The rage inside him exploded. He was about to do something to stop his father. He was on the edge of doing something he could never take back. The one who stopped him at the last second was his complete opposite, his little brother Lenny. Lenny was the exact opposite of Billy. Soft, gentle, kind. He took after their mother. If Billy got their father's hardness, Lenny got their mother's softness. Ennis puts it beautifully. Lenny was the yang to Billy's yin, a kid who answered violence and cruelty with hope. And that night, before Becky, he was the only person who could calm Billy down. Lenny stopped his brother. He told him that if he did that thing, he'd go to prison, and then their mother would be left completely defenseless. Billy thought about it for a moment, and he backed off. That night, Billy made a decision. He was getting out of that house. He was going to join the Royal Marines, that tough British military unit. Lenny, though, was afraid not just for their mother, but of the kind of man Billy would become if he ever really crossed that line. Billy found his true face in war. Billy joined the military and was sent to the Falklands War in 1982. This was a short but bloody conflict between Argentina and Britain over a remote group of islands, and it was here that Billy came face to face with the truth about himself. He had a natural talent for violence. In the fighting on a hill called Mount Kent, while men from his unit were being lost, he took the enemy down single-handedly. He was wounded, but he survived. And honestly, most soldiers fall apart after living through something like that. Trauma, nightmares, depression. But Billy wasn't like that. And that's exactly what made him so unsettling. It didn't touch him. It was as if that dark spot inside him had been preparing him for this moment since childhood. Maybe all those years of violence he witnessed in that house had made him this cold. In fact, before he went off to war, he'd gone to his grandfather and said, "I want to earn medals just like you." He was kind of romanticizing war, like most young people do. That heroism, that glory we see in the movies. But his grandfather told him something very clear. You don't want to go to war. You'll see things you can never forget for the rest of your life. It ruins you as a person. But Billy didn't listen. And the interesting thing is, it didn't end up ruined the way his grandfather warned, because the inner darkness that would have ruined him had already been shaped back in his childhood, so that violence at home had in a way prepared him for war. A bitter truth, but there it is. After the war, he was discharged over a bar fight. Actually, they valued him so much that his commanding officer offered to speak on his behalf at the court-martial. But Billy refused even that support. It was like he was determined to sink himself. He went back to England. But when he got back, he was a man who'd completely lost control. Drinking, fighting for no reason, slowly destroying himself. Living off his mother's pension. A man rotting away in a corner. That was Billy Butcher's lowest point until he met that woman, Becky. When Billy was at the very bottom of his life, he met Becky Saunders on a subway train. His eyes were bruised. His face was a mess. He'd just come out of a fight. Becky saw him and smiled, teased him. "Both your eyes are black. You look like a panda." That's how it started. They started talking. Then they got a few drinks. Then they started dating. Becky became the second and last person after Lenny who could soothe Billy. She was a social worker, so she was used to dealing with people at their most broken. She saw immediately what a dangerous road Billy was on. Because of her, he quit drinking. He stopped fighting. For the first time in his life, he found real peace. And Becky didn't just change Billy, she changed his family too. For years, Billy and Lenny couldn't get their mother out of that house. But Becky said something to their mother. "The man you fell in love with is long gone. That man doesn't exist anymore. There's no reason to stay here." And finally, Carol left that house. Something neither Billy nor Lenny had been able to pull off. Becky did it. Because sometimes the only way out of a darkness you can't escape on your own is for someone else to pull you out of it. Becky's approach was beautiful, really. She didn't try to change Billy by force. She didn't judge him. She just stood by him. One night she asked him a simple question. "In your whole life, have you ever wanted something just for yourself?" Billy had never thought about that before, because his life had always been about other people. Escaping his father, protecting his mother, fighting, and finally he said, "Maybe one day I'd just like to sit down and have a meal without talking about anything, just eating." That's simple. Becky gave him exactly that. Billy and Becky got married. And here in the comic, we see the soft, loving man underneath Butcher's hard mask for the first and only time. A smiling, calm, peaceful Billy, the man Becky called out of him. This was the only genuinely happy period of his life. And honestly, reading the comic, on these pages, there's a moment where you think, I wish it ended here, because this was what the man deserved, an ordinary, happy life. But in Garth Ennis's stories, happiness never lasts long. Tragedy is always waiting around the corner. The first blow came from Lenny. While Billy was in the military and Lenny was at university, Lenny died in a tragic accident in 1986. He was hit by a bus. Sudden, senseless, heartbreaking. Let me drop a small note here because this matters. The Amazon show tells this completely differently. In the show, Lenny dies by suicide. But in the comic, the actual story we're talking about, Lenny dies in a traffic accident. A lot of sources get this mixed up, but the original comic is clear. It was an accident. Soft rope tying Billy to the world snapped. There was only one person left who could keep him balanced, Becky. She was all he had now. Here I'm going to ask you something. What do you think keeps a person good? The people they love or their own will? Because Butcher's entire story is built on the answer to that question. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. Then Miami. Billy and Becky went to Miami for their honeymoon, and there on a public tour, they came face to face with live superheroes for the first time in their lives. That famous team called the Seven. Becky shuddered when she saw them. "These guys are creepy," she said. "You're more of a man than all of them put together." An ordinary, innocent moment. Two people on vacation, looking to the future. That night, Billy went out for a walk. Becky said she wanted to rest, and while Billy was out, Becky was the victim of a brutal assault. I'm not going to go into the details of this scene because it's both very dark and there's no need to. Just know this much. That night, Becky was attacked by one of those costumed figures, and for years everyone believed it was Homelander who did it. Homelander, the leader of that team, the strongest and most beloved superhero in the world. But I want to leave a question mark in your mind here. I said everyone believed Homelander did it. Don't forget that sentence, because by the end of the story, that sentence is going to change everything. Becky kept it from Billy. Over the following months, she withdrew more and more, pulled away, avoided being touched. These were the classic signs of trauma, but Billy didn't know what was going on at the time. He just saw his wife pulling away over something, and he couldn't figure out why. So why did Becky stay silent? Because she knew Billy. She knew him better than anyone. She knew that if he found out, Billy would lose himself trying to find that man, and he'd most likely die doing it. Because the one he'd be going after was a superhero, and Billy was an ordinary man. That was as good as suicide. So Becky stayed silent. She stayed silent to protect him. She carried her own pain, that terrible weight, all by herself, to save the man she loved. This is maybe one of the most heartbreaking sacrifices in this whole story. Think about it. Even in her own darkest moment, she was still thinking about him. That's the kind of person Becky was. And Billy would find this out much later, far too late. That night, Billy lost everything. A few months after the assault, a horrifying result of that attack came to light. Becky lost her life as the result of a rapidly developing, superpowered birth. I'm not going into the details here because it's not appropriate for YouTube, and frankly, there's no need. Just let me say this. That night, right beside her, Billy lost everything he had literally in a single moment. It's hard to put into words what happened that night. I can't fully describe the horror Billy went through, but you can imagine it. The love of your life, the one person who pulled you out of the dark, right in front of your eyes with nothing you can do. In that moment, the last shred of humanity inside Billy Butcher died too. It was buried along with Becky. And think about this. This man spent his childhood in the shadow of a cruel father, lost his brother, became a monster in war, and then they took the one person keeping him human too. Can a person carry all of that? The answer is no, they can't. Billy Butcher couldn't either. He didn't just break. He turned into something else entirely. Imagine this happening to you. You've just married the love of your life. You have plans for the future. And one night, everything is gone in a single instant. In the most horrible way possible. Even thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Because up to that point, Billy had taken every blow. His father, the war, Lenny, he'd always stayed standing, but this was different. This was the destruction of the one thing holding him up. And once that anchor was gone, all that was left was the old rage. But this time there was no one to calm it. No Lenny, no Becky, just him and that endless darkness inside. Right after it happened, local authorities tried to question Billy. They even pressured him to cover the whole thing up because Vought was involved. Vought, that massive company that owns nearly every superhero in the world. At the time, Billy didn't even know a superhero was involved. He only knew the horror he'd seen. And his response to that pressure was brutal. He flat out refused to be part of any cover-up. And that's exactly when Greg Mallory showed up. After Becky's death, Billy was in custody. And from there, a CIA-connected man, Colonel Greg Mallory, pulled him out. Now, here's a very important note. In the comic, Mallory is a man. His name is Greg Mallory. In the Amazon show, character was changed into a woman, Grace Mallory. But in the actual story we're talking about, Mallory is an old man who served in World War II. Mallory had his own personal war against Vought. In World War II, his own unit had been slaughtered because of a group of untrained superheroes. He was the only survivor. From that day on, he'd sworn to stop Vought from getting superheroes into the military. And for that purpose, with the CIA's backing, he'd built a secret team. A Black Ops outfit that watched superheroes and, when necessary, stopped them. The name, The Boys. Mallory gave Billy a diary that belonged to Becky. Billy didn't even know his wife kept a diary. Reading that diary, Billy learned what happened in Miami that night. The diary said it was Homelander who attacked Becky. At least, that's what Becky believed. And he also read why Becky had kept it a secret, because she was afraid Billy would go and get himself killed. By the way, right after it happened, Vought had stepped in. They gave Billy two choices. Either he'd take the blame for everything and spend the rest of his life in a cell, or he'd sign a document and stay quiet, and they'd cover the whole thing up. In other words, Vought was trying to make Billy a scapegoat so they could show that no superhero was involved. Billy didn't even fully know yet that a superhero was behind it. He only knew the horror. And he calmly asked the Vought representative in front of him, "Are you married? Can you imagine never seeing her again?" And he gave that man a taste of what he'd been put through. He left him blind for the rest of his life. That was the first real explosion of the darkness inside Billy. This was the moment that shaped the rest of Billy Butcher's life. Mallory told him, "It could take years, maybe decades, but I promise you one day you'll get your revenge on Homelander, and we'll bring the whole system down on their heads." Billy's answer was a single word, "I'm in." And just like that, the most dangerous man in the world walked through the door of the most dangerous team in the world. But hold on, where did these superheroes actually come from? To understand the rest of the story, you need to know how this world got the way it is. Because in the Boys universe, superheroes didn't fall from the sky. They were created by a company, Vought. Vought is actually a very old American company, and at the start, they weren't making superheroes at all. They made weapons, tanks, guns, planes. But like a classic corporation, they cared about money, not quality. They cut corners. The result? In World War II, the weapons they made were faulty, and soldiers died because of it. The same mistake repeated in Vietnam. A lot of soldiers lost their lives over faulty weapons. Remember I told you the legend lost his son? Well, this is exactly why. Because of Vought's greed. When the weapons business failed, Vought turned to something completely different. Genetic. They started altering people before they were even born, in the womb, with Compound V, to create superpowered beings, and that's how Homelander was born. He was presented to the public with a story about falling from the sky in a meteor, just like a Superman. The perfect hero people wanted to see. Someone who appealed to everyone, someone everyone loved, and he became wildly popular overnight. But here was the secret. Vought could make these heroes, but it was extremely expensive. Creating a single superhero cost a fortune. So they made only a very small number of true top-tier heroes, the 7 first and foremost. The rest were groups, experiments, accidents, or cheaper versions. So what was the real purpose of these heroes? Vought's true goal was to make these superheroes part of the American military. A force that won wars, protected the country officially, and that would earn Vought incredible money and power. That's what's underneath this whole story. Money and power, not heroism, just money. And then there's that horrible event. In this universe, something similar to that tragic 9/11 attack in the real world happened, hijacked planes. But here things went very differently. Vought wanted to prove how valuable its own superheroes were. They sent in the 7, but those heroes had no training. They didn't know hostage rescue, they didn't know crisis management. The result was a total disaster. Homelander panicked. Trying to intervene only made things worse. A plane crashed into a bridge. A lot of people lost their lives. And one of those heroes died that day too. After that event, 2 things happened. First, if the public had learned the truth, the disaster was actually caused by untrained superheroes, they'd have turned on Vought. Second, Vought covered the truth up. They pinned the blame somewhere else, redirected the public's attention, and cleaned everything up through their comic book arm, through propaganda. The heroes did everything they could, they said. And the public believed it, because they wanted to believe it. That's the system Billy Butcher was fighting, not just bad superheroes, an entire machine of lies. A world where people don't want to see the truth, a company sells them the lie they want to see instead. And honestly, the most unsettling part of the story is this. Because somewhere in there, it touches the real world too, doesn't it? People listen to what they want to hear, not the truth, most of the time. Anyway, let's get back to it. Mallory gave him his first job, Mallory actually wanted Billy at first just as muscle, a trigger man. But he quickly realized Billy wasn't just strong, he was smart too. So what was the first job? To take out a group of superheroes holed up in a cabin. Billy did it, using everything he'd learned in the military without saying a word, stone cold. He left the gun, he left the casings, got in the car, had a coffee with Mallory, and they drove off. He was sending a message, I'm back. And the game has changed. And honestly, that first job shows you what kind of man Billy was right from the start. Because when he walked into that cabin, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait for an explanation. He just did the job. This wasn't a soldier doing what he was ordered without question. This was a man who'd finally found a target for the rage inside him. All that darkness built up over the years had finally found somewhere to flow. And that made him both very valuable and very dangerous. For years, Billy and Mallory did this kind of work. They watched superheroes, stopped them, took them out when they had to, and slowly they added new members to the team. Each of these members has their own painful story. We'll get to them in a minute. But first, let me say this. It was Billy Butcher himself who gave this team the name The Boys. But there was a problem. Over time, Billy realized that Mallory was never actually going to help him kill Homelander. Mallory preferred watching, observing, keeping the balance. Billy wanted blood. And that difference between them eventually exploded in an event that would change everything. Let's meet the team. The people Billy gathered around him weren't ordinary. Each one of them, just like him, had lost something, had built up anger towards something, because Billy's logic was simple. If you're going to fight superheroes, you bring on people who have a personal score to settle with superheroes. Otherwise, someone could sell you out. First, there was Mother's Milk. A huge, strong, intimidating-looking guy, but really soft on the inside, a father. His story is genuinely dark. While his mother was working at a Vought-owned factory, she was exposed to that power-giving substance called Compound V. Compound V, the stuff Vought uses to create superheroes. His mother took it in without realizing and passed it on to both Mother's Milk and his brother. His brother lost his life because of it. Mother's Milk survived, but there was a price. Vought, not caring about ordinary people's lives, had caused all of this just for money. That's where Mother's Milk's hatred of Vought comes from. They filed a family lawsuit, fought for years, but beating a giant corporation like Vought in court was nearly impossible. His father died under the weight of that fight. Mother's Milk understood that if you can't get justice from Vought through legal means, you have to find other ways. Then there was Frenchie, a poetic, strange, but extremely dangerous Frenchman. His story also begins with a love, a betrayal, and a revenge. As a young man, he lost the girl he loved to a rival. Then that rival caused his father's death. And from that day on, Frenchie became a man who belonged nowhere, wandering the world. Billy found him in a bar fight. He was taking on a whole crowd of men by himself. Billy was looking for exactly that kind of man, a man with nothing left to lose. Because a man with nothing left to lose is afraid of nothing. And then there was the female, maybe the most dangerous member of the team. In Japan as a baby, she was exposed to Compound V waste in a lab. It gave her incredible power, but also an uncontrollable urge for violence. She was kept in a cage for years, her blood studied for Compound V. She never learned to talk, to play, about birthdays, anything a normal person knows, because they saw her not as a person, but as a weapon. When Billy and the team rescued her, Frenchie took her under his wing. He taught her to read, to be human, to belong to a family. For the first time, the female felt like she belonged somewhere. That's why she stayed with the team. So what brought these three people together? Pain. They were all people who'd been crushed in one way or another by the world Vought and the superheroes created. Billy Butcher brought them together. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's something very subtle here. This team is actually a family. A broken, strange, dangerous family, but a family nonetheless. Mother's Milk, a father trying to raise new kids in place of the family he lost. Frenchie, a man protecting the female like his own child. They've all lost something, and they're trying to fill the hole that loss left in each other. Keep that in mind. Because when you find out what Billy does to this family at the end of the story, that's when you'll really be shaken. But the boys didn't always work this quietly. Let me tell you why the team was so cautious, why they worked so covertly. Because there's a reason for it. Back when Mallory ran the team, the boys operated much more aggressively, much more directly. They'd kick the door in and hit, but if you hit hard, you get a hard answer back. And that answer came. The Seven realized someone was messing with them, and they traced it back to Mallory. A member of the Seven named Lamp Leader. For revenge, did something horrible to Mallory's grandchildren. He took 2 innocent children from this world. I'm not going to open this topic up any further because it's very heavy and there's no need, but know this event changed everything. Because Mallory couldn't take a blow that landed this close to home. His own grandchildren. His years-long war had finally cost him the people he loved most. And Mallory pulled back. He left the boys. From that day on, the team either disbanded or shifted to a much more cautious approach. And this is exactly where Billy Butcher took over leadership. Billy's method was different. He no longer kicked the door in and hit. His method was to watch, to gather information, to blackmail. The message was, we're watching you and we're making moves against you, but we're not doing it recklessly. Because Billy had so much dirty information that if anything happened to the boys, all of it would leak to the press. So why didn't the 7 just kill them? That's why. There was a kind of truce between them. Tense, reluctant, but a truce. Both sides had a lot to lose, and we actually learned how that truce started. At one point, Mallory and Billy had threatened Vought with those horrible photos and the truth about the plane disaster. The 7, on Vaught's orders, offered a deal. If they didn't expose the truth, Vought would back off its efforts to get superheroes into the military. And as a sign of good faith, they handed Lamplighter over to Mallory, the man who killed his grandchildren. But Billy wasn't happy with this outcome at all, because his only goal was to kill Homelander, and the whole plan had ended in just a truce. This is where Mallory and Billy's paths split completely. Mallory was keeping the balance. Billy wanted blood. Now we come to where the story begins right before our eyes, the opening of the comic. Years have passed, the team has been disbanded for a while, and Billy Butcher is gathering the team again. In the first issue, we see Billy on a park bench sitting with his loyal dog, Terror. Keep this dog in mind, because Terror is the living thing Butcher cares about most after Becky, and that dog is the last thing holding his broken soul together. But we'll get to that. Superheroes are flying through the sky, and Billy looks up at them and says, I'm gonna get you lot. In the very first panel, we understand that this man hates superheroes to his core. Then the story shifts to someone else entirely. In Scotland, ordinary young guy named Hughie Campbell. Hughie's relationship with his girlfriend Robin is wonderful. They've just gotten engaged. They're looking to the future. And then, in an instant, a super-fast hero named A-Train, while chasing some villains, slams into Robin. In seconds, Hughie loses his girlfriend. And A-Train, he doesn't even stop to look. Like he's saying, someone will clean this up. He keeps running off. Indifferent. This scene captures the spirit of the whole story. In this world, superheroes don't care at all about ordinary people's lives. While Hughie is devastated, Billy Butcher knocks on his door. Just like Mallory did to him years before. Billy presents himself as a savior. I understand your pain, I can help you, he says. But really, Billy is looking for something. Let me say this too, because why Billy chose Hughie is very important. Billy was looking for someone Vought had offered money to, but who turned it down? Because most people, when they lose a loved one to a superhero, take Vaught's hush money and go quiet. But Hughie didn't. That made him different. Made him trustworthy. That's why Billy went all the way to Scotland to find him. He asks Hughie why he wants him. Hughie asks the thing we're all wondering, why me? I'm nobody special. Billy's answer says a lot. I want someone who's felt it before. Someone who knows what it's like to lose somebody to a superhero. And here we understand that Billy lost someone too. Maybe Hughie reminded Billy of his dead brother Lenny. Soft, kind-hearted, not ready for the cruelty of the world. Maybe Billy saw in him the brother he couldn't protect. Who knows? But Billy's first move didn't sit too well with the team. After Hughie joined the team, Billy stuck a needle in his neck without even telling him, without his consent. What was in it was Compound V, the stuff that gives superheroes their powers. Billy said he did it as a safety measure, because if they were going to fight superheroes, Hughie needed a chance too. But Hughie was furious, because no one asked him. He wasn't given a choice. And this was actually the first sign of what kind of man Billy Butcher was. On the road to his goal, people's choices were a secondary concern to him. Let me also say this. In the comic, the boys use Compound V, so they have powers too. This is very different from the show. In the show, the team usually doesn't have permanent powers, but in the comic, it's a cornerstone of the story. Because if you're going to fight superpowered enemies, you need that power too. And by giving it to Hughie without asking, Billy showed something else. In this war, there was no such thing as a choice. Either you were in or you were in the way. And really, Hughie's whole journey starts here. At the start of the story, Hughie is an innocent, soft kid who doesn't want to hurt anyone, the kind who says, I can't do this. I'm not that kind of person. But as the story goes on, Huey slowly changes. First, he kills someone by accident. Then he has to dispose of a body, and bit by bit, he gets pulled into the boys' dark world. And the bitter part is that change makes him more like Billy. So Billy was, in a way, pulling an innocent kid into his own darkness, too. Keep that in mind, because what Huey does to Billy at the end of the story is going to reveal the whole meaning of this journey. And the war began. Billy's first big move was against a young superhero group called Teenage Kicks. In the public's eyes, these kids were a bit rebellious but well-meaning. But the truth was completely different. Billy and the team watched them for days, photographed them, recorded them, and they turned all that dirt into a blackmail weapon. A message went to the team: "We know what you're doing. Sacrifice one of your own, or we expose everything." That was Billy's method. Not brute force, but brains. Surveillance, blackmail, manipulation, rotting your enemy from the inside. And this first move was the opening shot of a war against Vought that would last for years. And the Teenage Kicks situation turned into a fight at one point, because those kids didn't know who Billy was, how he worked. The 7 knew him, were wary of him. But these kids charged in blind. And what did they find waiting for them? A team that had taken Compound V, had combat training, had nothing left to lose. The result was what you'd expect. And in that fight, by accident, Huey panicked and struck one of them, killing him. This actually wasn't part of the plan, but once it happened, there was no going back. The boys had drawn first blood. And from that moment, the gloves were off. Now it was a full-blown war. Meanwhile, when Homelander heard about that blackmail business, he immediately knew. "This is Billy Butcher's work," he said. So the two of them had a history. And that's how Homelander learned Butcher was back. Let's stop and ask something here. Is Billy Butcher right? I mean, really think about it. On one side, you've got corrupt superheroes who don't care about people, but whom the public worships. On the other side, you've got a man trying to stop them, but who turns to darker and darker methods every passing day. Whose side are you on? Because this is the best part of this story. Good and evil aren't that clear-cut. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Butcher a hero or a monster? If the story has caught you this far, please don't forget to subscribe, because the truly stunning part is just beginning, and trust me, when you hear how it ends, everything is going to change. Billy's war kept growing. What comes next is a series of fronts in Billy Butcher's war against Vought and the superheroes. I'll move through some of them quickly, because we're getting close to the important part, but each one shows you a little more about what kind of man Butcher was. Billy found a source, a guy called The Legend. He used to work in Vaught's comic book division, the man who wrote the fake stories of the superheroes. Think of him as one of those old comic book bosses, the man who knew all of the company's dirty secrets. But at some point he turned his back on Vought because he lost his son in the war because of Vaught's faulty weapons. From that day on, he'd been quietly collecting information against Vought, and he was passing this information to the boys. The Legend started leaking all the dirty secrets about Vought to Billy. Inside info on Homelander and the 7. By the way, there's a nice detail here. When Billy officially brought Huey onto the team, he gave him a big black trench coat. This wasn't just clothing. It was a message: you're one of us now. And it also had a practical purpose, because in the middle of a fight, it's hard to tell who's a friend and who's an enemy. Billy's rule was simple: anyone not wearing this coat is an enemy. Hit them. That clean. That's how Billy Butcher's mind worked. Everything had a purpose, every detail had a logic, and here we learned something. Vaught's entire empire is built on a lie. Superheroes are marketed through comic books. The public is told these heroes are great, they protect you, they fight for good. But the truth is completely different. Comic books are a propaganda tool. People believe what they want to believe. Vought sells them what they want to believe. Think about how clever and how dark that is. Billy's war took him all the way to Russia. Honestly, this Russia section is one of the cleverest pieces of the comic. There he met an old friend, a Russian superhero named Love Sausage. Yes, that's really his name. I know, don't laugh. But here's what's important. Remember I said Billy hated all superheroes? Well, Love Sausage is the exception, because Billy's hatred is actually aimed at superheroes who do bad things. If someone with a strong moral compass, someone he can respect, crosses his path, the fact that they're a superhero suddenly stops mattering. That shows how complicated Billy's seemingly black and white world really is. Anyway, in Russia, he uncovered that a ruthless crime boss named Little Nina was running a whole conspiracy together with Vought. Nina was gathering an army of superheroes using a faulty version of Compound V. Her plan was, Release this army in Russia, let chaos break out, let the government lose control, and then Nina would step in and wipe them all out, declaring herself a hero. That way she'd come to power. But Vought had its own plan too. Use Nina and then discard her. And here we see just how far ahead Butcher thinks. Because Billy figured out the whole plan, even when Nina sent assassins after him, he was a step ahead. And the way he took Nina off the board is incredible. Many steps in advance, he'd set a trap for her, and Nina brought about her own end at a moment she least expected. Reading this, I thought, this guy really calculates everything in advance. Butcher's scariest quality isn't his muscle, it's his brain, because you can deal with a strong muscular enemy. But an enemy who sees your every move 3 steps ahead, there's no escaping him. But Billy didn't get exactly what he wanted out of this one either. Because when he handed all that information over to the CIA did nothing. Why? Fear. Because Vought was so powerful that if the CIA made a move against them, Vought could unleash all of its superheroes on them. And no army, no government could deal with that. That was Vaught's real power, fear. And the more Billy saw this, the bigger his hatred of the system grew. In another incident, he learned that the Deep from the Seven had treated Huey's girlfriend Starlight, real name Annie, badly. In response, Billy threatened Vought so hard that he brought the whole team in line. Because Billy had so much dirty info that Vought was afraid to touch him. Oh, speaking of Starlight, Annie is actually the purest, cleanest character in this story. A bright-eyed, honest girl from Middle America. Since childhood, she dreamed of joining the Seven. To her, being a superhero was the greatest honor. But when she got into that team, she learned the bitter way that the reality wasn't what she'd imagined. The world she'd stepped into wasn't as shiny as it looked from the outside. On the contrary, it was deeply dark and corrupt. And Annie slowly started wrestling with an existential crisis. What am I doing here? Why is everything I believed in a lie? This is where her path crossed with Huey's. Both of them, without realizing it, were carrying their lives' darkest secrets to each other. Huey hid that he was a member of the Boys. Annie hid that she was a superhero. They were both lying to each other, but they were both really 2 separate victims of the same world. We'll come back to this in a bit, because this relationship turns into a terrible weapon in Billy's hands at the end of the story. There was also a group called the G-Men. These were a kind of parody of that famous mutant team. They were presented to the public as heroes rejected by society but good at heart, but the truth was stomach-turning. The leader of this group spent years kidnapping little children, giving them Compound V, adding the survivors to his own ranks. When Billy and the team uncovered this, Vought stepped in and wiped out the whole group. Why? Because the G-Men had become a liability. A scandal was coming. And Vought had one rule: nothing disrupts the flow of money. This is one of those moments where you realize no one in this universe is truly safe. Vought would harvest even its own people without blinking. They became a threat. Then there was an event called Harrigasm, a secret island gathering where Vought superheroes put their darkest faces on display. The public was told the heroes are going to space to protect the world from threats, but in reality, they were gathering on an island and showing their ugliest sides. Billy and the team infiltrated it and gathered a ton of blackmail material. I'm not going to detail these scenes because, honestly, most of it isn't suitable for YouTube, but know this. This event was the clearest illustration of the gulf between the face superheroes showed the public and their real faces. On one side, those flawless heroes on the posters, on the other, the reality. And that reality was ugly enough to turn your stomach. This was what Billy had been saying for years. They're not what you think they are. And every single time he turned out to be right. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but in this story, almost every scene is built on something not being what it seems. A respected father, actually a cruel man. Beloved heroes, actually monsters. Billy, who looks like a savior, actually the biggest threat. Garth Ennis keeps telling us to look under the mask, and I think that's one of the things that makes this story so powerful. And then there was Payback, the second strongest team after the Seven. This group, which included dangerous names like Stormfront and Soldier Boy, set a trap for Billy and the team, and here we see one of Butcher's most savage, but also one of his cleverest moments. The fight started badly. Payback was strong, they scattered the team, and at one point Billy was left alone, face to face with a group of superpowered enemies. Now, what would a normal person do? Either run or charge head-on and die. But Billy did neither. Instead, he acted like a Batman. He pulled back into the shadows, he killed the lights, and he started hunting them one by one. Speaking in the dark, spreading fear, creating an environment where they couldn't feel safe. When they turned a corner, find the friends who'd been beside them a moment ago lying on the ground. This broke their will, because Billy knew he couldn't beat enemies this powerful with brute force, but he could beat them with fear. That was Billy Butcher's genius. Even the strongest enemy, if you play it right, you can take down with their own fear. I won't go into the details of this fight because it's pretty brutal, but let me say this: that day, nearly all of Payback was wiped out. And what was left was a very clear message about how dangerous Billy could be. When this man was backed into a corner, he became his most lethal. Stormfront's background is interesting too. A leftover from the World War II era, having adopted the twisted ideologies of that time, one of the first successful subjects of Compound V. But in the end, even he couldn't stand before Billy and the team. Through all of this, Billy also struck up a relationship with CIA Director Susan Rayner. But even this relationship was part of a calculation. Billy secretly recorded their conversations because he planned to use it as leverage when needed. So Billy wasted no relationship, no moment. Everything was part of the plan. And here's something dreadful that most people miss. At one point, Billy gave Rayner some files. Those files described how to make special missiles that could kill superheroes, missiles that could target anyone with Compound V in their genes. Billy asked her to pass them to the military, supposedly to use if Homelander ever staged a coup. But looking back now, this takes on a much more unsettling meaning, because even back then, Billy was laying the groundwork for wiping out superheroes en masse. This man was playing chess years in advance, and we, just like the other characters, wouldn't understand what he was doing until much later. But underneath all this war, the team slowly began to suspect Billy. Mother's Milk, Frenchie, and the female were noticing that Billy was getting more and more out of control. One day, Mother's Milk asked Billy, "Have you ever thought maybe there really are good superheroes out there?" Billy's answer says it all. Maybe, but if there are, screw them. They'll go bad eventually anyway. That was the world inside Billy Butcher's head. To him, if a superhero lived to the end of their life without turning bad, it was only because they hadn't lived long enough. Absolute power brings absolute corruption. That was his sacred rule. And because of that rule, he saw even potentially innocent people as the enemy. Huey, on the other hand, was going the opposite direction. Huey was slowly understanding that Billy wasn't really just policing superheroes. He was getting a satisfaction out of torturing them, out of destroying them. Huey was starting to see how dangerous this man was. But at the same time, he had to accept that he was part of this war. And here's something genuinely dark happened. Billy learned that Huey was dating Starlight, and Billy's paranoid mind kicked in right away. What if Huey is actually a Vought spy? What if he's a mole who's infiltrated us this whole time? He even interpreted Huey's narrow escapes from those dangerous situations with suspicion. Maybe the superheroes were deliberately not touching him because he was their man. Of course, this was completely wrong. Huey was just an ordinary, honest kid, but that's how Billy's mind worked. He trusted no one. To test this, Billy sent Huey on a dangerous mission. He slipped him into a group that had an extremely dangerous superhero named Malchemical. His logic was, if Huey was really Vought's man, superhero wouldn't touch him. But this nearly got Huey killed, and this is where Mother's Milk blew up. He confronted Billy. "You can't send one of our own to his death just because of your paranoia," he said. Because Mother's Milk believed the team had to look out for each other. This is where that crack inside the team started. Billy trusted no one. Not Huey, not Mother's Milk, maybe not even himself, and that distrust would in the end ruin everything. And then came the event that destroyed Billy's world. Remember I told you about that dog at the very beginning? Terror. That loyal bulldog sitting next to Billy on the park bench. Well, now you're going to understand why he matters so much. There was a hero from the Seven named Jack from Jupiter. At the time, there was a strange tension between the boys and the Seven. A third party was trying to turn the two against each other, and no one fully knew who was doing what. After a confrontation, Jack, thinking it was Billy's doing, wanted revenge, and he went after the thing Billy valued most in the world, his dog Terror. One night, the team came back from dinner, and when they opened the door to headquarters, they found Terror on the floor, lifeless. Terror was dead. Now think. This man lost his wife, lost his brother, watched his mother suffer, lived through hell and war, and through all of it, he stayed standing. But that dog was his last remaining piece of humanity, the last rope tying him to the world. And that rope snapped too. Billy turned to the team. He didn't shout, he didn't lose it. He turned with a calm face and said, "Excuse me, lads, I've got to go see a man about a dog." And he left. He found Jack from Jupiter. I'm not going to detail this scene, but Billy that day was at his most terrifying because a screaming, raging Billy wasn't the scary one. The truly scary one was the calm Billy, cold, determined, knowing nothing could stop him. That day, he took Jack out. By the way, remember A-Train, that super fast hero killed Huey's girlfriend Robin at the very start of the story? Well, at one point, Billy captured A-Train and brought him in front of Huey. Here's the man who killed your girlfriend. Now, what do you want to do? Billy convinced Huey to kill him? This was another example of Billy's power over Huey. He played Huey that old recording, the one showing A-Train after Robin's death not caring at all, like he was saying, "What do you want me to do? These things happen." In that rage, Huey took A-Train out. So Billy was pulling innocent Huey into his own dark world, step by step, each time by pressing the right button. And now we come to a point of no return, because up to here, Billy was a warrior, a man who'd suffered, hardened, but had a purpose. From here on, it's a completely different story. Now we come to the real heart of the story. Everything up to this point was really just set up, because what I'm about to tell you changes the whole story from top to bottom. And honestly, when I first read this, I set the book down for a second and said, hold on a minute, because Garth Ennis sets up something where when you look back, everything takes on a different meaning. Homelander. Up to that moment, Homelander was the most powerful, most terrifying figure in the story. Vought's star, the public's god, the leader of the Seven. But for a while now, something had been going wrong. Homelander was slowly losing his mind because he was being shown things. Photographs of himself committing unthinkable, horrible crimes. Homelander would look at these photos, but he didn't remember any of them. Think about that situation. You're being shown photographs of horrible crimes you committed, but you don't remember any of them. Slowly, you start to doubt your own mind. Did I do these things? Is there someone else inside me? That's exactly the hell Homelander lived through. Eventually, he convinced himself he was a monster. If this is what I am, he said, then what's the point of playing the good guy? Homelander snapped. He gathered the superheroes and declared war on America. In Washington, at the White House, he launched a coup. This was the most chaotic moment of the story. A god, losing himself and declaring war on the world. Billy didn't let this chance slip. Billy Butcher realized the moment he'd been waiting years for had come. Homelander, Becky's killer. At least that's what he believed. He went to the White House. He walked into the Oval Office alone with nothing but a crowbar in his hand. Inside, he found Homelander. Billy asked him about Becky. The moment he'd been building toward for years had come. In front of him stood the man he believed had taken his wife. There was something odd. Homelander didn't remember anything. He didn't remember Becky, and he didn't remember those horrible crimes in the photos. And he wasn't just faking it. He genuinely didn't remember, because he hadn't committed those crimes. And this is exactly where the biggest truth of the story came out. Another figure walked in, Black Noir, silent, masked, mysterious member of the Seven. The man whose face no one had seen, whose past no one knew, and Black Noir took off his mask. Black Noir was a clone of Homelander. If you said, wait, what at this point? It's exactly the reaction I had reading it. Take a second to let it sink in. Black Noir was an exact genetic copy of Homelander. In fact, an even stronger version of him. Vought had created him years earlier, with one single purpose. If Homelander ever went out of control, a backup to kill him and take his place. Like an insurance policy, but that order never came. Black Noir stood beside Homelander for years, watching him, waiting for the order to kill him. For years, a being created for a single purpose, but who could never fulfill that purpose. Think about how tragic that is. Your entire existence has one reason, and that reason never comes. You just wait, right next to your target for years, unable to do anything. And when that order never came, he slowly lost his mind. A weapon with no purpose, like a shark that has to keep swimming but has nowhere to swim. Eventually, he made a horrible decision. If the order to kill Homelander wasn't coming, he'd make that order come himself. For years, Black Noir disguised himself as Homelander. He wore Homelander's costume because physically he was indistinguishable from him. And he committed those horrible crimes in Homelander's name. He was the one who did everything in those photos. And he was the one who secretly leaked those photos to Billy Butcher. His goal was to get Vought to see Homelander as a threat and give the order to kill him. And now the heaviest truth. Remember, at the very start, I told you, everyone believed Homelander attacked Becky. Don't forget that sentence? Well, this is why. The one who attacked Becky in Miami that night wasn't Homelander. It was Black Noir, disguised as Homelander. Billy Butcher hated Homelander for years. He burned everything for it, turned the whole world against himself, buried his own humanity, but Homelander had never even touched Becky. Billy had spent his entire life hating the wrong man. Think about this tragedy. A man builds his entire life on a revenge, and in the end he learns the person he hated isn't even the real culprit. So what happens to a man who builds a whole life on the wrong target? Where does that hatred go? What do you think Billy felt in that moment? Drop it in the comments, because to me this is the most devastating moment in the whole comic. In that room, everything broke loose. Black Noir's truth coming out drove Homelander insane. Two gods, two exact copies, tore into each other in the Oval Office. Billy pulled back because staying in the middle of that fight meant death. In the end, Black Noir overcame Homelander. So Homelander died paying the price for crimes he never committed at the hands of his own clone. Think about it for a second. What a bitter end. He died at the very moment he came face to face with the biggest truth of his life, that he was actually innocent. And remember, just told you Billy gave the military those superhero kill-killing missiles. Well, that day, the entire superhero army Homelander had gathered for the coup was wiped out in the sky with those weapons. The superheroes who thought they were so powerful, who said, "Who could ever touch us?" were gone in an instant. Because Billy had planned this far in advance, once again, he was a step ahead of everyone. When Black Noir came out, he was gravely wounded, and the military waiting for him opened fire with heavy weapons. Tanks, massive shells, everything. But Black Noir still wasn't fully dead, because he was created even stronger than Homelander, and that's the moment Billy Butcher stepped in, with his crowbar in hand. He was the one who finished Black Noir. I won't detail this scene too much, but Billy finally got his revenge on Becky's real killer. Years later, he stood before the true culprit and he settled the account. "This is for Becky," he said, and the story could have ended here, right? Billy got his revenge. His wife's real killer was dead. Homelander was gone. The superhero empire had collapsed. A happy ending, or at least some kind of ending. But no, because Billy Butcher's story doesn't end here. The truly horrifying part begins right here. Because even when his main enemy was dead, the hatred inside Billy didn't fade. And this is the darkest turn in the whole story. Billy Butcher, the man we always saw as someone fighting against superheroes, turned into the actual villain of the series. Do you know what Billy's real plan was all those years? It wasn't just revenge for Becky. It was something far bigger. Billy wanted to wipe out every superhero in the world, all of them, no exceptions. The good, the bad, the innocent, the guilty. In his eyes, they were all the same. If you have superpowers, you're a threat, period. And for this, he'd prepared a weapon. A weaponized version of Compound V. This weapon would kill anyone with Compound V in their genes. And let me drop a note here, because the show does this differently. In the show, there's a contagious virus spreading from person to person. But in the comic, it's not like that. In the comic, Billy plans to disperse this substance into the air with bombs triggered at a specific frequency. So a deliberate, calculated, cold-blooded plan for genocide, not something that spirals out of control like a virus, entirely intentional. But here's the problem. Over the years, Compound V had spread into the world, not just in superheroes, but in ordinary people too, in trace amounts. So Billy's weapon would kill not just superheroes, but millions, even billions of innocent people. This was no longer a targeted revenge. This was an indiscriminate catastrophe. And the most horrifying part, Billy knew this. He didn't even care. In his eyes, that was the price of saving the world from this threat. Let's stop and think now, because this is what truly turned Butcher into a monster. Remember, at the start I asked you, is Butcher a hero or a monster? Here's the answer. That justified anger that began with Becky's death grew, in the end, until he decided to wipe out the very humanity he was trying to save. The darkest example of where pain can take a person. And to carry out his plan, Billy started taking out the people closest to him. To create this plan, he used the inventor of Compound V, Jonah Vogelbaum. He'd secretly kept him alive for years. When Vogelbaum finished this weapon, Billy took him out too, in cold blood, because he didn't need him anymore, and he didn't want anyone to know about this plan. But first, so that no one could ruin his plan, he started cleaning up his old connections too. Remember his friend Love Sausage in Russia, that good-hearted Russian? Billy took even him out, because Love Sausage had grown suspicious of Billy's secret plan and started tracing it. Then the Legend, old man who'd given him information for years, who trusted him. He took him out too, because the Legend had information that could lead Huey to the truth. Billy was eliminating everyone who could ruin his plan, one by one, cold blood, When you realize this, you understand that what's in front of you is no longer a warrior, but a full-blown villain. Then he turned to his own teens, the people who'd fought beside him for years, who trusted him. First, Mother's Milk. He was the first to learn of Billy's plan, and he opposed it fiercely. Because Mother's Milk, however hard he looked, was a good man at his core. He could never stand by while innocent people died. Confronted Billy. He asked him, "Are you really going to do this?" Billy's answer was a single word, yes, and then he took out that man he'd fought shoulder to shoulder with for years, that huge, good-hearted man trying to fill the place of the family he'd lost, a man trying to be a father, then Frenchie and the female. He set a trap at the boys' headquarters and took out both of his old friends that way too. Frenchie, the female he'd taken under his wing for years, taught to read, to love, to be human. Two people bonded like father and daughter, both of them instant gone. It even gets to me telling you this, honestly, because these people were Billy's family. Remember I said at the start, the team was really a broken family? That's why I said it, because Billy destroyed that family with his own hands. People who'd believed in him, fought beside him, spent years with him, and Billy, for his goal, wrote all of them off. This is the point absolute hatred brings a person to. The point where you start seeing even your loved ones as an obstacle. Becky had made him human, but once Becky was gone, there was nothing left to protect that humanity. And now no bond, no loyalty, no friendship could stop him. Do you think a person can really fall this far? I mean, to start with justified pain and end up a monster who'd sacrifice even those closest to him. Drop it in the comments because I think this is exactly what Garth Ennis wants us to question. And only one person was left, Huey. Huey learned about the plan. And he realized he was the one who could stop Billy. Maybe this was these two's destiny from the very beginning. The man who came disguised as a savior and the kid he saved. In the end, they faced each other. They met at the Empire State Building. Billy had cleared the building out. Using his authority at the CIA, he'd said there's going to be a terror attack and evacuated everyone. And there, in that empty building, the two faced each other for the last time. When Huey got there, he was scared to death. Because Billy Butcher is the kind of man that when he speaks, people fall silent. He has such a dominant, such a terrifying presence. Huey had always feared him. Billy represented a chaos Huey wasn't used to. And now he was face to face with the man he feared in a matter of life and death. Now you're expecting a big fight here, right? At the top of the building, an epic battle. Flying through windows, smashing through walls. But no, Garth Ennis surprises us again, because it wasn't about the fight. The fight only lasted a few seconds. During the struggle, both of them fell below. An iron railing pierced Huey's leg, and Billy in the fall broke his neck. He was paralyzed. He couldn't move anymore. His plan had failed, and now he lay there, unable to budge. And this is where Billy Butcher made his last and cleverest move. He goaded Huey into killing him. He told him a lie. "I killed your family." All of them? This was a lie. Billy hadn't even touched his family, but he wanted Huey to finish him in that rage. Why? Because for Billy, the alternative was rotting in a prison, paralyzed for life, a shadow of his former self, and he couldn't take that. So even one last time, he manipulated Huey. He turned him into the thing he'd been trying to make him from the very beginning, a killer. Huey, believing that lie, in his rage, pulled the piece of iron stuck in his leg and drove it into Billy, and Billy Butcher died with a bloody smile on his face. Because he got what he wanted. He designed even his own end himself. And here's the final bitter twist of the story. After Billy died, Huey called his family, and he learned they were alive and perfectly fine. So Billy had lied. He hadn't killed his family. Huey had killed him believing a lie. This was Billy's final joke. From the very beginning, Huey had wanted to break free of Billy controlling him, manipulating him. He didn't want to be a killer like him. But in the end, Billy controlled him one last time. He used him to kill himself. Huey, against his will, became the final piece of Billy's game. Think about how dark that is. A man who can turn even his own death into a manipulation. That was Billy Butcher, to the very end, the smartest, the most ruthless, and the most broken man. So what's left of all of this? Look, when I finished this story, I just sat there for a long while. Because Billy Butcher isn't an easy character. You can't love him. But you can't hate him either. Because you know how he got that way. A man born into violence who lost his brother and his wife and was crushed in the end under his own pain. Billy Butcher's story is really a warning. The story of where pain, revenge, hatred can take a person. Billy started with justified anger. He really had been wronged. They'd taken his loved ones from him. But the more he gave himself over to that anger slowly, He became the very monsters he was fighting. In the end, enough to decide to destroy the humanity he was trying to save. And maybe this is what Garth Ennis wanted to tell us. If you stare into an abyss long enough, the abyss stares back. Billy Butcher believed so completely that superheroes were monsters that in the end, he turned into a bigger monster than all of them. And think about this too. Billy actually sank a little deeper into the darkness at every point where he was proven right. Vought really was corrupt, yes. Most superheroes really were evil, yes. The system really was a lie, yes. Billy was right about all of it. But that's where the tragedy is. Because being right didn't make him a better person. On the contrary, every time he was proven right, it led him to say, so I'm right to wipe them all out too. Being right is sometimes the most dangerous thing, because it pushes a person to see everything they do as blindly justified. And Billy fell into exactly that. But remember Mother's Milk's question, what if there really are good ones? That was the thing Billy could never accept. Because accepting the existence of even one good superhero meant questioning his entire worldview, his entire war, everything he'd done. He couldn't do that because that war was the only reason he survived without Becky. Without that war, all that was left was pain. So Billy, in a way, kept going because he was afraid to stop. Because if he stopped, he'd be crushed under the weight of what he'd lost. One more thing. Becky, where this whole story began, the woman who made Billy human, who pulled him out of the dark, if Becky had lived, Billy might have been a completely different man, maybe a happy, ordinary life, but fate took that one good thing from him too. All that was left was hatred. Sometimes a person's goodness hangs on a single person, and when that person is gone, what's left? Billy Butcher's story is the darkest answer to that question. Finally, if you've watched this far, if you've listened to this long, dark story all the way through, I genuinely thank you. Because putting these stories together takes a lot of work, and I can't keep doing it without your support. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and hit that like button. For the next video, drop a comment with which character you want. Maybe Homelander's whole story, maybe Soldier Boy, maybe the true face of the Seven. Write it because I want to hear from you. And now, before we close, let's think about one last thing together. Billy Butcher didn't want to be a hero. Honestly, he didn't want to be anything. He just wanted an ordinary, peaceful life with the woman he loved. But the world didn't give him that. He answered the world in his darkest form. Maybe there's a little Butcher in all of us. When we're wronged, when we lose something, that anger that wakes up inside us. But Billy's story shows us this. If we give ourselves over to that anger, in the end, we can't get back the thing we lost. We just burn everything that's left. He couldn't save Becky. He couldn't bring Lenny back. But maybe he could have kept their memory alive a different way, with the softness, the love they'd taught him. He didn't choose that. That's his real tragedy, not the people he lost, but that he buried the goodness they left him too. I think about one more thing. Did Billy Butcher never change, or was he always like this? Picture that final scene, him talking at his father's coffin, because in a way, comic presents Billy's whole story as a reckoning with his father. Billy spent his whole life trying not to be like his father. He could say, I never beat my wife like you, never crushed the people closest to me. But in the end, in his own way, on his own scale, he authored a destruction far greater than his father's. And that's maybe the most painful thing of all. Because while trying to escape that darkness, he turned it into something far bigger. So what do you think? Was Billy Butcher a monster from the very beginning, or did life make him this way? Genuinely want to know. Definitely drop it in the comments, because I don't think there's a clear answer to that question. That's exactly where Garth Ennis's genius lies. If this story made you feel something, if Butcher's journey made you think this much, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, because there are more characters, more dark stories to tell in this universe. With your support, I'll tell every single one of them. Sleep well. Good night. I'll be here again in the next dark story. Because every monster has a beginning, and we'll keep telling those beginnings. The story is over, but the question Billy Butcher leaves behind is still hanging in the air. Is what makes a monster the darkness he's born into, or the answer he gives to that darkness? Maybe both. Maybe it's just the story of a man who lost the woman he loved and never learned how to live without her. And that's exactly why Billy Butcher isn't forgotten. Before you go, a few quick facts about Butcher you might not know. First one, Billy Butcher's full origin gets its own dedicated book, a 6-issue story called The Boys. Butcher, baker, candlestick maker, and Garth Ennis frames the entire thing around Billy talking to his dead father at the man's funeral. Pretty much everything we covered about his childhood, the Marines, and Becky comes from there. Second one. Garth Ennis has said Butcher is one of his favorite characters he's ever created. He wrote him as an even darker, more morally compromised take on the brutal anti-hero, a man you understand but can never fully forgive. And that's the whole point. Ennis didn't want a clean hero. He wanted you to be uncomfortable. And the last one. Here's the thing that makes Butcher so terrifying. In the comics, he has no real powers of his own. Everything he pulls off against gods, the planning, the manipulation, the cold ruthlessness, he does as basically a regular man with a small dose of compound V. He's the most dangerous person in a world full of superhumans. He's just a man. Maybe that's the scariest part of all.